we want to be talking about how we experience what we call consciousness or reality. How do we take in information? How do we feel about that information? How do we use that information? How are we experiencing what we call reality? I'm hoping to get a lot of input from all of you about consciousness, because I think we can all learn things from each other about how we bring in information, how we utilize the information, and basically how we experience each other. Of course, experiencing the whole rest of the universe, that's also critically important. But in this context, since we are brainstorming our human connection, in this context, we really want to take a break and take an opportunity to look at how this impacts how we interact with each other. And of course, one's interaction with others starts with one's interaction with oneself. You know, how are you experiencing yourself? Often I like to start with, how well do you know yourself? This is not new. People have been asking since we've been writing, pretty much, you know, like about our experience of ourselves. And we've also been admonished many times to know thyself and to learn about yourself. But I want to explore with you a little bit about what that actually means. You know, people will say things, for example, like live in the present. And there are some interesting observations, testable observations, mutually verifiable observations that we can have about the ability to be in the present. Okay, there are things that we should explore and be aware of when we say we are in the present. And then there are things that we say and do. Let's say what we experience as hot or cold, what we experience as frightening, or what we experience as calming, and how do we experience that? You know, there are so many things that we can explore. So let's get started. Okay, so the first question is about defining terms, and that is, what do you call conscious or consciousness? What can you say? What can you share about being conscious? That's the kind of 50,000-foot view. What are we talking about question. Don't all jump in at once.
Well, I think you're conscious, and what I think we're pretty clear on what that is, but also drawing from the subconscious all the time. Things are surfacing as you live your conscious life. The subconscious, I think, is very close to the surface and is triggered in various ways. So your present tense being is constantly being having other things from other times flowing into it. So I think there's a lot of fluidity in consciousness, and a lot of back and forth between the conscious and the subconscious, or what's referred to as a subconscious. We're not even sure that subconscious is a good word for what I'm talking about. So I think the conscious self is pretty inclusive of everything that's in there.
Well, I want to explore that, Charles, because judging from the deafening silence, I'm not so sure that everybody understands what consciousness is. You know, I mean, I think we somehow feel that we know what it is, and we may, in fact, know, but not be able to say it. But I'm not so sure that we share a common idea of what consciousness is. And if we do, maybe it deserves a check-in just to make sure, you know, rather than just assume. Anybody? Todd, did you have?
Well, I think, I mean, on a real base level, the way it's often, I mean, people think about it, I believe, is like, the ability to sense. So like you see and smell and taste and hear, this is part, that experience of your senses, being able to kind of comprehend them in some form, whatever it is, I would say is kind of a baseline, low level kind of consciousness. It's just talking about an awareness of what your senses are taking in. I think for a lot of people, that's a big part of it. Although I know Chuck's, or Charles going toward there a little bit, in that it's more because how that's shaped, how you take stuff in is shaped by, past experience and thoughts. But like you're talking about being in the now is really a sensory thing. It's like being right there and everything that you see, hear, taste, smell, and then how that produces or how you react to it mentally, the thought process of that. So those, it's like something happens in your mental reaction to it, I suppose.
Well, my first thoughts about conscious versus unconscious come from, early life and medical kinds of things. Somebody's been knocked out cold, or you respond to an accident. Are they conscious and breathing? Are they responding? Are they not responding? Relatively more recently in my life, people started talking about living in the moment and meditation and things that were new to me and still are for the most part. So that's quite a spectrum of possibilities for describing or defining conscious. I'd like to hear more answers.
Yeah, Annie, did you have any input on that?
Well,
welcome, by the way.
Oh, thank you. And I'm not in pajamas, so I'm on screen today. In Rapid City, it's an hour earlier, 9:30. It's just, no, it's not hard for me. But anyway, so I peeked at this question yesterday and started thinking that I don't really know. Is it to be awake? But then there's consciousness. Our body is sensory when we're asleep, and it's conscious of things that are going on. I think about people who, maybe in a coma could have some sense of awareness that we don't, our bodies have awareness beyond what we conceive. So is our body conscious? Is it a human thing that we have to be aware of our sensories? Is it a sixth sense? I don't know. It's vexing because there are, there's just such a variety of ways to consider it. I don't know.
I think that for me, the purpose of posing that question, one is to get people to think about it, mm-hmm. and to share. That's the underlying thing, is like to share different ideas of perspectives about what it could mean, but also to look closer at it than we usually do. I think at the 50,000 foot view, we can say that it is the awareness of sensory input and the processing of that sensory input, okay, at a very base level, the physics level, okay? There are impulses that are coming in, stimulate the nervous system, and the nervous system tries to make sense of, that is the brain, tries to make sense of that sensory input, okay? The brain making sense of sensory input. But we want to go a little further than that. I'm going to start with that working definition as at least something, a fallback, a default, if you don't have one. If you have one, then we can use that one. Just let us know what it is if you have another one. But I think that's a beginning point, because that's just the nervous system working. But I think we have a sense that consciousness is something more than that. I can't guarantee that it is, but I think people tend to operate that there is something that we create that goes beyond what we can, beyond the sensory input, right? There's this thing of being, quote, self-aware, okay? And we can become self-aware because we step on a tack, you know, we know that there's something happening because the tack sends a message, you know, but there's also one that happens in dreams. You know, there's an awareness that happens in dreams. There's an awareness that happens in the imagination, creating a world out of whole cloth, you know, and whole imagined cloth, you know, just creating something that doesn't exist in anything physical that we can identify. You know, that is a kind of consciousness as well, okay? So when we think of consciousness, it seems that we have to take those kind of things and more into consideration. That brings us into how we're going to use that, or how we're going to operate in it. So my question would be, why is being aware of your consciousness, however you define that, why is that an important thing? And this may be, as Charles was saying before, it's like, well, you kind of have a sense that, yeah, everybody knows what that is. But I think I would like you to share it so that I may know what it is and just assume that you are thinking the same thing I do. Because it's just, let's look at it as a kind of a check-in to see, are you thinking the same way am I thinking? Maybe you think something more, you know? So why would you think that being aware of your consciousness would be an important thing, or is it?
I think for me, it is a great help in my decision-making, just in moment-to-moment, day-to-day life. And I'm, relatively recently aware of that. I think there was a lot of my life that I went through being more or less unconscious and subjected to other people's direction and suggestion and responding to things. But now I realize that I have opportunities to actually, this sounds kind of hippie drugified, which I never have been yet, but to be altering my consciousness in ways that give me an opportunity to change the way I'm feeling. I could be feeling without purpose, what am I doing today? I don't feel like doing anything. But then if I start changing what I'm thinking about, maybe looking for some direct stimulation, whether it's something visual or reading or going outside or something like that, then it can really give me, it can wake me up to, don't be sitting around feeling sorry for yourself. Don't be idle. If you would rather be active, find something you feel like doing. Talking out loud, thinking out loud, responding.
Well, thank you. Go ahead.
If I may, if I move from conscious to consciousness, then I think it is to be aware, and that provides insight, self-reflection, like Betty said, just intentional, and it does inform my behaviors, my thoughts, my principles, my values in a different way, because I have consciousness. I've activated a consciousness about them. I don't know if that makes sense. I want to hear from you. I tuned in to find out what consciousness is and how to, what it might mean. But yeah, it's self-reflection. It's just, it's very complicated. It's a vexing question.
Yeah.
And I think I echo what Betty says, that it's like a hyper awareness, there's a hyperactivity in consciousness that just elevates it above just acting pro forma.
Yeah, you bring in the whole element of, as Betty did, of intention. That's another element. Welcome, Kylie and Kathy. We're discussing consciousness, and at this point, we're trying to explore why being conscious is important. Well, I mean, we can ask, is it? But we can ask, if we think it is, why is it important? And then if we think it isn't, maybe why it's not important. But just we're exploring it so that we can get into what do we do with it and how we can use it. So any other ideas of why is it important to be conscious? Why not just be a vegetable and with tubes? Is that a better thing? And is that conscious? Maybe they're conscious too. They just...
Why would anybody try to make the argument that being conscious is not important?
I don't know.
Who in the world would say that?
I don't know.
Even the person who doesn't do much thinking about it. Can you find somebody on this planet who would say that he doesn't think being conscious is important?
Well, I try to live in the theater of all possibilities, Charles. So I like to write somebody off and just assume things, or at least I say, okay, look, I'm thinking that it's important. But if somebody thinks it's not, I'm okay with that too.
I'm not writing anybody off. In fact, I'm doing the opposite. I'm being exclusive in what I'm saying. I'm saying that I think everybody who is sane, at least, believes that being conscious is important.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
If I may, Charles, just to counter your point, I think that I think it's hard. It's hard work to be in that sense of consciousness, and it also can be painful, or requires confrontation with oneself. I mean, I don't know. I mean,
Well,
I hate to, I don't know, put it out there, but sometimes, my cats look like they got a pretty good thing going, right?
well,
Because-
but I think to your point, there are people who make quite an effort to lose consciousness, inebriation, drug induced, like too much stuff going on. I just want to like float around and just forget it all, or just be out of it, and they pay good money to get bad drugs to do that, and manage to do that. So, I mean, like I say, I like to live in the theater of all possibilities. To go along with Charles, I would say, would I call that sanity? Maybe not, but still there are people who somehow seem to value it.
Well,
I'd
I
like
think
to add to-
there are degrees of attentiveness, maybe that's what you're talking about.
Oh,
That some of us have put more emphasis on being attentive to what you started with, living in the moment, paying attention, in other words. And then I think there are a lot of people who are inattentive or not all that attentive to what is happening, drifting, if you will, not doing a lot of processing of experience. All conscious, but some of us more attentive than others, I think. So we're talking about degrees of attentiveness. I think cats are more attentive than people. Well, they are, animals are, they're paying attention all the time, they're little multi-sensory receptors. I envy that, the degree of attentiveness in your average house cat.
no, that's a good point. I wanted to throw in a couple more possibilities for non-attentive or subconscious, perhaps, people. And now I've got 2 or 3 things here. Attentive to me is a word that kind of suggests someone who cares about themselves or others. There are people who just, and people I know who are not ignorant or uneducated, but they immerse themselves in TV shows that have really nothing to offer other than, zoning out, and in books too, that just devour them, but for no apparent purpose other than to just sort of drop out of consciousness of what's going on around them. So I think it kind of goes back to what Annie mentioned about painful. I think people who do that are suffering from some kind of a pain that they are not conscious of, and they'd like to keep it that way.
One thing like I will say though is like sleep, dreams, hallucinations are all states of consciousness. So I think we need to be intentionally mindful that we don't just think that somebody has to be awake to be conscious. And so we do have a low awareness when we are sleeping or dreaming, but our body is still receiving signals and reacting on them.
Yep. Thank you.
I think that's an important distinction too, that you don't always have to be aware in the exact moment of what your mental state or your body mind connection was, but it can be after the fact, or even like hypnosis is a state of consciousness, but you're able to be controlled by someone else. So it's such a really not just a little box that everything fits in, but it's kind of really so broad. And it's almost hard for me to think about that because, right, we like to think of consciousness as like someone's able to respond or they can tell you their name or, those types of things. And sleeping and dreaming are states of consciousness. Kind of mind blowing.
So we're talking maybe altered state of consciousness, and all states of consciousness is altered to some extent.
Right, I would agree.
Mhm.
And there's this case, this, what you're getting to here, I hadn't thought a lot before I found out about an experience that a lot of friends of mine have had who have gone on safari. They'll go to Africa on safari. And one of the things you got to do or should do is you take a medicine before you go, because you can get, what is it called? The most common deadly disease. What is it, by mosquito?
Oh, malaria.
Malaria,
Malaria.
yeah.
So you take this malaria medication.
Chloroform, yeah.
Right. So there's these two types, and one of the types you take beforehand, and it's pretty strong. And I've known there's more than one couple who have taken it at the same time because they're usually going together, obviously. And one of the first symptoms that you have from it is that you have shared dreams, which is, if I hadn't been told by more than one person that they had this experience, I don't know if I would have believed it. But more than one person has told me, and they're as weirded out by that as I am when I hear it. But it is something you talk about, the different states of consciousness, because we do try to put it in boxes because that's how we kind of define our universe, right? And so it's one of those things where, it isn't always defining, but you do find, I think, Betty had talked about it, being aware how others influence you, but it's also a connecting thing for people. This is a lot of reasons we create and write and speak about our experiences that we have in consciousness, is not just to define ourselves, but also to try to find some common ground in the universe, make us not feel so alone. Consciousness, is something we hope, or a lot of people try to think about on a grander scale, that is a connecting thing as well. And so, and there's even lately in this year, I know if you've read some stuff this year, there's a whole new theory, or I don't know if it's new, but a theory that's been talked about recently about how the universe itself may be conscious and our brains are like in tune with that somehow. So, I mean, it isn't, you're right. The box theory, we like to speak in boxes, but it's certainly something bigger.
Very interesting points. Many very interesting points. I think the one that is most, shall I say, salient, or most right up there right now, is mutually shared. Right from the thing you were talking about, the mutually shared dreams. But I think even when we're talking about how we experience consciousness, a lot of it has to do with, do I think you're conscious? Because there's a certain implied responsibility for your actions if you're conscious. For example, if somebody is having an epileptic seizure, we often look at them as like unconscious, even if they're moving around. And so if they swing their arms and break our precious vase, we have a whole different reaction to it than if they picked up the vase while we thought they were conscious and broke it, right? That would be a whole different thing. So there's a sense of like a mutually shared consciousness, reality. And it's with that mutually shared consciousness that we connect into other people's consciousness, share their consciousness, and multiply the benefits of those consciousness. It's like kind of like transistors. One transistor is not doing that much. You put a whole bunch of them suckers together and you have the internet. So, another form of consciousness. So that mutually shared consciousness, that is another thing that a person can explore, and also how that mutually shared consciousness becomes a kind of consciousness itself. How, like, when we all witness something there and there's a shared consciousness, that sharing actually becomes a kind of awareness in and of itself, a we can say we become aware that we are discontiguous organisms. And a discontiguous organism is like a lot of cells that actually work together as one body, but they're not in any way physically connected. Okay, so that would be a discontiguous organism. And we see that sometimes people call it a superorganism, like we see like birds in the sky. There's no leading bird that says, hey, let's all go this way. But suddenly they all sort of move this way or move that way. They all go from one continent to another continent by this discontiguous movement. You know, fish do the same thing. Okay, so maybe that's a kind of consciousness too. You know, that allows us to move together as one organism. Okay, so I hope that isn't too esoteric. So now look, we can start to move maybe a little bit deeper. I mean, if somebody has other things you want to say, feel free to jump in. I think we can, it's a small enough group, we can kind of jump around, try not to do it too much so we lose track. But I'd like to explore like how you try to be more conscious. We talked about how there are degrees of consciousnness and there's altered states of consciousness. So I think there's an agreement here, and if somebody objects, say so. But I think there's an agreement that it's not just one thing, you know, it's not a singular thing. So how do you try to become more aware and more conscious? Even, you know, we can start with the self or as a group, however you feel comfortable talking about it.
Slow down for one thing.
Say that again.
Slow down for one
Slow
thing.
down.
Yeah,
You say slow down.
slow down. I think that the faster we go, the less aware we are. Consciousness is all about slowing down so that you have time to pay attention.
Slowing down. Mm-hmm. Kathy, did you have a thing you want to say?
I was just going to share, Lawrence, that sometimes, you know, in the course of a day, a person has a lot going on, and when I feel like I'm on the edge of just going through motions, not being involved, I try to step back and think about, are you going to put your name on this? Are you signed up for this? Are you there? Before I ever walk into the session or the meeting or whatever, and I really find that consciousness of what are you bringing? Are you bringing something to share back and forth or not? Determines for me whether or not that has my name on it, if you will. And I find that makes a huge difference, and I think contagious when I think about working with colleagues. So that's just what I personally do when I know I'm on the verge of just going through the motions. So.
Did you say you feel contagious? Was that the word you used?
I think that intent of being there, showing up, being engaged is contagious. I do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Anyone else? Go ahead, Annie. You got to turn your mic on.
Well, I think, you know, reflecting back to previous comment, and maybe particularly Charles's earlier, is this set this intention, purposeful, yeah, I can't remember the term, but so there's degrees of attention or intention. And I mean, I think those who achieve or strive for enlightenment, it's still very intentional. It doesn't happen spontaneously. It's through an effort of intensive work. And that comes through slowing down or stopping and saying, where am I with this? I think it's that sense of, reflection, taking stock intentionally, purposefully.
I'm reminded of what's been said recently about multitasking. Tests have proven basically that multitasking is a myth, that it reduces our attentiveness in various ways. We're less mindful of the multiple things we're doing, reversion to a semi-awareness, because we think we're being more productive by doing more than one thing at a time.
Yep, very important point. Very important point. Anyone else? I'd like to throw out an idea about time, because that keeps coming up, especially, as Charles was mentioning, like multitasking. We think of time as something, well, we have different ideas about time. Some of them are conflicting. And one of the conflicting ideas is about past, present, and future. The very concept in which we experience reality is most of us, we experience reality as a linear event going from one space to another space, okay? But is it really? Is it really a linear event? Well, our brains process it as a linear event because it can make sense of that. But I think it's worthwhile exploring whether or not we're just given a representation of reality, or if we're dealing actually with a reality. So what I mean by that vis-a-vis time is that when you think about the future, we don't really know it. We imagine it. We create that out of pretty much nothingness. I mean, we can say from the past, we project into the future, etc. But really, when we think about it, most of the time when we think about the future, it isn't a very complete thought. There are little spots, and then we sort of put it back and forth, and we can't. It's like trying to grasp smoke. The tighter we squeeze, the less we have. And so we look into the future and we create that. So that's not a thing. It's like just except that we make it up. Then when we look at the past, we remember. In other words, we put together bits and pieces of the past, kind of like we do with the future. We have, these little things we put together in our head, and we call that the past. So we never actually gather all of the information. And so we can't remember it because we never have all the parts, if that makes any sense. It's kind of like, let's say you imagine looking out a window, or you try to remember looking out a window, and you might remember how you felt about looking out the window, but you can't recall the feeling, okay? You try to reassemble the feeling and remember how you felt. I felt sad, I felt this way. But, it's kind of like if you hurt yourself, recalling the pain, I don't know if you really want to, You can mostly recall how you felt about the pain, but recalling the pain is, if possible at all, is pretty tricky business, you know? So we remember the past. Then we get to that thing we talk about, the now, the present. And it's problematic because the brain takes about 1/30th of a second to create a thought or an experience from stimuli. That is to say, from the time that light hits your eyeball to the point that you are aware of the light hitting your eyeball takes at least 1/3 of a second. Okay. What that means is you can't be in the present. By the time you're aware of something, it's the past already. You know, we're already experiencing the past. So if there's no past, no present, and no future, do we exist? You know, it's like the Twilight Zone.
I have a question. I have a question for you, Lawrence.
Sure.
Thoreau famously said, "Time is but the stream I go a fishing in."
Yeah.
What do you think? What do you think Thoreau meant by that?
I think that the idea is that we're standing in a place, the thing is moving, but you know, are we really, you know, where are we in the stream? The stream is going down someplace else. We're standing in that place, and it's this one spot that we're in. The stream is going by, and we're never really, by the time we're aware that we're there, the stream is someplace else and it's doing another thing, you know? So it's like, it's an illusion that we are experiencing the stream, you know, because, I mean, we are, but in a sense we aren't, because by the time we even are aware of that spot and that action, it's in the past. Now, is that really what he meant? I never had a chance to talk to him, so I can't like check in, but that's the way I would interpret what he said.
I'd like to add a little something.
Sure.
Lawrence and I have talked about this, and we just kind of don't quite agree on the point that he just said. Well, I agree, but I think it might be a little too far in the weeds for like the purpose of how I think about this stuff, which what he's saying is technically true. But the way I like to look at it is, and I put that comment in the chat. I don't know if you all saw that, but basically Eckhart Tolle says that anytime your mind is caught up in the past or the future, you're unconscious. The only moment where anything has ever happened is now. So if you're living in the moment that's happening to you and you're not caught up in your mind in the past or present, then you're conscious, you're living in the now. And it's ironic because people are often trying to escape reality. And if you think about it, like watching Netflix or something to escape, okay, you're escaping. But if you just can realize that the current moment is all you have and like trying to escape it another way, well, if you can just stay focused on what's happening to you, you're going to escape because you escape all those thoughts that are spinning in your head, like what's going to happen in the future? What about that thing that happened 10 years ago? So his argument is just that like by living in the moment is its own escape from the past and present. And obviously I'm a big fan of this book, so if you're interested, I highly recommend it.
Yeah. Thanks, Ryan. I think those are really important points to input. There are many different ways to look at consciousness, being present, Um, Many people are exploring that, and that's what we're doing right now. And there all of those different approaches, I think, are very relevant, because finally you have to decide yourself, and you don't have to be stuck on your decision, but you have to find a working thing that gives you some benefit, or you can, I don't know that you have to, but you can decide, okay, well, let me look at it this way, or let me try using it in this way. You know, when I think of the practical part of what it means to live in the present, it's just experiencing. I experience the present as it's a slight past. Okay, so it's like, okay, I know intellectually that the light that I see coming from the sun left 12 minutes ago. So that's not whatever I look, when I look up at the sun, I know that that is not the sun as it is at this moment, right? When I look up at the stars, I know that that's not the stars at this moment. That's the stars at maybe 4 billion years ago, depending on the telescope you're using and how far back you can look and where you're looking, right? But I know that nothing I see, especially in the night sky, is a current event, okay? But I treat it as such because it's current to me at this moment, okay? It's current to me at this moment. So I can switch back and forth in those time zones, knowing that, because I live understanding that whatever I see is an illusion. You know, it's not the real thing. You know, if I meet somebody, if I meet you and we have a conversation, the next time I meet you, I expect that you're a different person. Now, I may pretend that you're the same person for continuity and also to make it easier to talk to you, you know, but be assured that when I meet you, I'm assuming that you're not the person that I met before, because I don't know how you could be the same person, because things have happened to you. Something has changed, even if I don't notice it. You've eaten something different, you know, and if you've eaten something different and consumed that something different, you're different, you know, you've had different experiences. So with those things in mind, I don't know what it means to be in the now. You know, because the now is like Charles was saying about the stream, you know, the now is like, what is that? You know, who is that person now? Right. So, but I act on it as though I act and move around in the world as though it were real, even though I'm aware that it's demonstrably an illusion. Does that make any sense? Yeah. So how do you try to achieve consciousness? We'll go back to that. Charles had the suggestion of just slowing down, paying attention. Anybody else?
Well, self-expression is certainly a way to heighten consciousness. English novelist Ian Forster said, "How do I know what I think until I see what I say?" And so writing and speaking, those are all means of self-awareness and self-discovery, of living more intensely in the moment, I think.
I call myself a visual artist sometimes, and I don't always paint from the same awareness level, but sometimes I find a deeper level of awareness while I am involved in a painting. To the extent I've had times when this is pretty weird, but I have to say it happened to me, where it feels as if someone else is holding the brush and refusing to put those marks where I thought they belonged. And it was advantageous to me that they went where they went. So that may be for me another way to achieve awareness.
Very useful. Maybe someone else will find a way to practice that same thing. Maybe they'll find, you know, some kind of expression, whether it's writing, as Charles was talking about, or painting, as you're talking about, or, you know, picking up the basketball. Maybe you want to play basketball.
Well, reading too, but I guess I'm more aware of that now because I'm intentionally taking time, slowing down, and actually reading all these books I surround myself with. I won't live that long, but certainly when I have my consciousness more present, I get a lot more from what I'm reading. Things show up and seem understandable that I probably would have skimmed over before. I don't know if that's consciousness or just reading better.
Anyone else, any suggestions of or sharing that you can do in how you become more conscious, or maybe we can say in some other way, more aware, more attentive?
I would second what Betty said. I've noticed recently that reading is much better for me that way, because if I'm watching something on TV, sometimes my mind will wander and start thinking about things. But if I'm reading, it's actively engaged, so it can't really do that. I mean, once in a while that thing will happen where it's like, oh, there go 3 pages and I don't remember any of it. You know, I think that happens to a lot of people when they read, but for the most part, I think keeping your mind actively engaged is very helpful, as opposed to, you know, passively watching something on TV, for example.
Right. And one thing too is just the practice of it. I mean, somebody had said this during this discussion, which I can't remember, which probably tells you a little more than should, but you know, it's something that you do with intention to have that, right? And so to practice that, it's something that you have to do. And there's things that you do that, you know, like getting out some of the bunk, like not having electronic devices while you're watching television or reading a book or walk, you know, I mean, by getting down to a singular activity, a lot of times mentally will help that. And then also just kind of, you know, when I was a kid, my mother was really big into like dreams, Edgar Cayce stuff, and also transcendental meditation. And she taught me TM and stuff when I was like in 9 or 10 years old. And it, you know, at the time it seemed kind of like, yeah, what is this? But, you know, thinking back about it, you know, we have those moments of contemplation, and sometimes it's a practice. So I went to a college where they had, you know, every morning they had half an hour where that's what you were supposed to do. And they called it quiet time. And it didn't matter what you did, but you had to have time to think and just kind of contemplate. And what it did was it sharpened your ability to kind of experience things and think about things a little more. But it's a practice. And so, I mean, if you don't have that, it's really hard to just sit down a lot of times. Life is busy, and there's a lot of distractions that buzz all around us all the time, schedules and, you know, of course, all our devices and stuff like that. But if you get in the practice, you can, you know, be more able. It kind of strengthens your ability to do it. And I think that's something that people talk about, but it's really it's an effort, and it's got to be made time for, like anything else that you do. It's like lifting weights almost for your brain in some ways.
Well, we're coming up on the end of our time here together today. I want to encourage you to continue this exploration of your own consciousness and how you might link your consciousness with the consciousness of others, not just other people, by the way. You know, try seeing through the eyeballs of a cat. And that doesn't mean you'll have the same processing, but just taking the time to explore how the cat might see, hear, feel things could be very instructive and gives you a different kind of dimension or expand your consciousness. Whenever I hook up with the consciousness, especially of another human being, I do so almost as a parasite, in some way, because I'm trying to absorb the consciousness of that individual, to see through their eyeballs, to experience life as they experience it, knowing that full well that I hardly really know what I'm feeling, let alone what they do, but the effort proves beneficial. It may not be the thing that I intended to or am trying to accomplish, but just the effort will give me an experience. Just like that Holy Grail thing, you're going to search for the Holy Grail, but it doesn't matter if you find it, because it's the journey, not the destination. It's not finding the thing. It's the journey and the experience of finding the thing that is the prize. Okay. So that said, one of the things that you can do even when you're alone is something I think Charles was alluding to in slowing down, and slowing down enough to pay attention to your breathing. Just breathing slow and deep, sitting in a relaxed state where you don't have to be conscious of suspending yourself in a way that you don't fall on the floor, but in some way, however you feel comfortable, laying down, sitting down, standing up, whatever you feel. And then after breathing, after you learn how to breathe, another kind of exercise is paying attention to your sensory input. For example, just paying attention to all the sounds in a room. Explore with your ears all of the sounds that you can. Some of them will be coming outside of the room. Some of them will be coming from inside of you. But paying attention to not only the sounds, but how you experience the sounds. Paying attention to what you see. Look at a thing and then look at it again, and then stop looking at it and come back and look at it with a beginner's mind, as though you had never seen it before. With some practice, you will start to feel things that you have never felt before, hear things that you were unaware of, see things that you have never seen, smell things that you have never smelled. The world can start to open up to you because you simply paid attention. So I would encourage you to just sometime, 5 or 10 minutes, do some of those things. And then when you start to speak with people, listen to them with intention. Think of yourself as like, it's not important if you agree or disagree or anything like that, so much as, can I get behind the eyeballs and the emotion of this person? Can I experience what they are experiencing? Can I see the world as they are seeing it? And then synthesize that as, okay, well, if I do, what does it mean to me? What new thing did I discover about even just myself? You know? Well, next week we'll have a new exploratorium. Thank you for showing up. We'll see you next week. Bring a friend.